The alien commander stood tall, his eyes scanning the simple, unremarkable training facility before him. He snorted in contempt. "This is Earth's military training?" His voice was thick with disdain. Around him, his officers nodded in agreement, their postures reflecting the same arrogance. To them, this was a joke, a laughable display compared to the vast, technologically advanced military systems they commanded. Earth's primitive methods were beneath their notice. The teacher, a quiet man in his late 40s, stood off to the side, observing the interaction. He was dressed plainly, blending into the background, as he always did. He made no attempt to defend the facility, nor did he react to the commander's remarks. His expression remained neutral, almost detached. The commander spared him a glance, quickly dismissing him as irrelevant. "Is this all you've got?" The commander sneered, pacing slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. "I've seen children's playgrounds more impressive than this. How do you expect to train soldiers capable of surviving in real combat?" His question was rhetorical. He didn't care for an answer. He was already convinced that Earth posed no threat, that their soldiers were nothing more than glorified amateurs playing at war. The teacher said nothing. He didn't need to. His students, scattered around the facility, were silently going through their training drills. Their movements were precise, deliberate, and focused, though they maintained an air of casual discipline, as if this was just another ordinary day. To the untrained eye, they seemed unremarkable, just like their teacher. But there was something beneath the surface, something that only those who truly understood combat would recognize. The commander, of course, didn't notice. His gaze remained fixated on the surface details, the old-fashioned weapons, the simplistic training equipment. He laughed again, shaking his head. "We should move on. I've seen enough. There's nothing here worth my time." The teacher shifted slightly, his calm gaze resting on the commander for a brief moment. "You haven't seen anything yet," he said softly, though his voice carried enough weight that the commander paused for a second. It wasn't a challenge, nor a boast. Just a statement of fact. The commander raised an eyebrow but quickly waved his hand dismissively. "I don't need to see more. This training," he gestured vaguely at the soldiers running drills, "is beneath us. My forces could wipe you out in seconds. You're wasting your time." His words were sharp, but there was no malice. He simply didn't see humans, or their training methods, as a serious factor in galactic warfare. The teacher's face didn't change, but inside, he knew the commander was making a grave mistake. The soldiers under his command were far from what they appeared to be. Years of training, discipline, and experience had shaped them into elite warriors, unmatched in their skills and strategy. But it wasn't in his nature to argue. He had learned long ago that the greatest strength wasn't in loud proclamations or flashy demonstrations. It was in quiet preparation, in the steady, patient honing of one's abilities. The commander turned his back, clearly done with the conversation. As he walked away, his officers followed, still chuckling among themselves, their voices low but filled with condescension. The teacher watched them leave, his eyes narrowing slightly. He had seen their kind before, arrogant, dismissive, overly reliant on their technology and superior numbers. They all made the same mistake, and they all paid the price eventually. One of the teacher's students approached him, a young soldier with sharp eyes and a quiet intensity. "They don't understand, do they?" he asked, keeping his voice low. The teacher shook his head slightly. "No. They never do. Not until it's too late." The student glanced toward the retreating figures of the alien commander and his entourage. "Do you think they'll challenge us? Try to prove their superiority?" "They might," the teacher replied, his voice calm. "Or they might walk away, convinced they have nothing to fear. Either way, it doesn't matter. We are ready, and they aren't." The student nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "They'll never see it coming." The teacher didn't smile, but there was a quiet satisfaction in his eyes. "No. They won't." The conversation ended there, as it often did. The teacher turned his attention back to the training grounds, where his soldiers continued their drills. To an outsider, it was a scene of routine, of ordinary soldiers going through the motions. But the teacher knew better. Every movement, every action was part of a carefully crafted strategy, designed to push these soldiers beyond their limits, to prepare them for battles that would test them in ways few could imagine. And when the time came, these soldiers would be ready. The alien commander might have dismissed them as weak and insignificant, but he would learn the truth soon enough. Earth's warriors weren't just soldiers. They were the deadliest in the galaxy, trained by the best, honed by experience and knowledge that stretched far beyond what the commander could comprehend. The teacher, for his part, remained silent. His role was not to seek recognition or validation. His strength lay in his ability to stay unnoticed until the moment was right. The alien commander had made the mistake of underestimating him, just as so many others had before. But it didn't matter. The results would speak for themselves in the end. As the day drew to a close, the alien commander's ship lifted off, disappearing into the sky. The soldiers continued their training, the rhythm of their movements steady and controlled. The teacher watched them, his gaze thoughtful. He knew that this encounter was only the beginning. The commander's arrogance would lead him to make choices that would bring him face to face with Earth's true strength. And when that time came, there would be no turning back. The teacher knew this better than anyone. He had seen it all before. The next day, the alien commander returned, still wearing that air of superiority. His arrogance had not waned, in fact, it seemed to have grown overnight. His footsteps echoed across the facility, his eyes sweeping over the soldiers once again. He gestured dismissively at the exercises being conducted. "This is still what you call training?" he asked with a smirk. The teacher stood nearby, arms crossed, watching silently. His expression gave nothing away, but he was observing every movement, every reaction from the commander. The soldiers continued their drills, ignoring the presence of their alien observers, focused on the tasks at hand. The commander motioned to one of his subordinates, a tall alien with a sharp gaze. "Show them real combat training," the commander ordered. The subordinate nodded and stepped forward, calling out to a small group of alien soldiers who had accompanied them. They quickly lined up, their armor gleaming under the sunlight, their weapons humming with energy. The display was meant to impress, to intimidate, but the Earth soldiers didn't flinch. They remained focused, continuing their drills with an air of discipline that was both admirable and unnerving. The commander watched the Earth soldiers for a moment, then turned to the teacher. "Let's make this interesting," he said, a sly grin spreading across his face. "Your soldiers against mine. A friendly competition, just to show you how far behind you really are." The teacher's expression remained neutral. He glanced at his soldiers, who were now standing at attention, waiting for his response. He gave a small nod, signaling his agreement. "If that's what you want," he replied calmly. There was no hesitation, no nervousness in his voice. He spoke with the quiet confidence of a man who knew exactly what was about to happen. The alien commander's grin widened, clearly pleased with himself. "Excellent," he said. "Let's see if your so-called soldiers can keep up with real warriors." The challenge was set. The aliens would face off against Earth soldiers in a simulated battle. The commander was certain his troops would win, convinced that their advanced weapons and technology would give them an insurmountable advantage. What he didn't realize was that Earth soldiers had been trained to think beyond technology, to rely on strategy, skill, and instinct. As the simulation began, the alien soldiers moved with precision, their weapons flashing as they engaged in a coordinated assault. They expected the Earth soldiers to crumble under the pressure, to be overwhelmed by the superior firepower. But that didn't happen. Instead, the Earth soldiers responded with a level of coordination and discipline that took the aliens by surprise. They moved as a unit, adapting to the terrain, using their surroundings to their advantage. While the alien soldiers relied on brute force and technology, Earth soldiers demonstrated a deep understanding of tactical warfare. They were patient, precise, and most importantly, unpredictable. Every move they made seemed calculated, as if they were always 3 steps ahead of their opponents. The commander, watching from the sidelines, frowned as he realized the fight was not going the way he had expected. His soldiers were struggling to keep up. Despite their advanced weaponry, they couldn't seem to land a decisive blow. The Earth soldiers were too fast, too coordinated, and every time the aliens thought they had them cornered, the humans would slip away, reappearing in unexpected places to strike back with devastating efficiency. The alien soldiers, frustrated, began to lose their composure. Their attacks became more aggressive, more desperate, but it only made things worse. The Earth soldiers capitalized on every mistake, dismantling their opponents with surgical precision. One by one, the alien soldiers fell, overwhelmed not by superior technology, but by superior tactics and skill. The teacher watched the battle unfold with the same calm expression he always wore. This was no surprise to him. He knew what his soldiers were capable of. They had been trained for exactly this kind of scenario, to outthink and outmaneuver an opponent who relied too heavily on their technology and strength. As the last alien soldier was taken down, the battlefield grew silent. The Earth soldiers stood tall, their expressions unreadable, as they awaited further orders. The alien commander, on the other hand, was visibly shaken. He stared at the scene before him, struggling to process what had just happened. His soldiers, his elite warriors, had been bested by a group of humans using nothing more than outdated weapons and basic tactics. He turned to the teacher, his face a mask of disbelief. "How?" he began, but the words caught in his throat. He didn't know what to say. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. In his mind, humans were weak, incapable of standing up to the might of an advanced alien military. And yet, here they were, victorious. The teacher met his gaze, his expression unchanged. "It's not always about the weapons," he said quietly. "It's about the soldiers. How they think, how they adapt, how they work together. That's what wins battles." The commander's jaw tightened, his pride stung by the quiet truth in the teacher's words. He didn't respond, but the anger in his eyes was clear. He had underestimated them, and now, for the first time, he was beginning to understand just how big a mistake that had been. Without another word, the commander turned and walked away, his soldiers following behind him in silence. The battle was over, but something told the teacher that this wasn't the end. The commander was not the type to accept defeat easily. There would be more challenges, more tests. But that didn't matter. The teacher knew his soldiers were ready for whatever came next. As the alien ship disappeared into the sky once again, the Earth soldiers returned to their training, their movements as precise and disciplined as ever. They had won the battle, but their focus remained unwavering. They knew better than to grow complacent. This was just the beginning. The teacher watched them for a moment, then turned and walked back toward the training facility. The commander might have learned a lesson today, but he hadn't learned the full extent of what Earth soldiers were capable of. Not yet. But he would. Soon enough he would. The alien commander, despite his initial shock, wasn't ready to concede defeat. He couldn't accept that these humans, primitive in his eyes, had outmaneuvered his elite soldiers. There had to be an explanation, something he hadn't accounted for. In his arrogance, he convinced himself that the humans had simply gotten lucky. He wouldn't let this slight go unanswered. He returned with a new plan. This time, it wouldn't just be a friendly simulation. He wanted a real test, one that would prove, without a doubt, the superiority of his forces. The teacher, as always, didn't protest. He agreed without hesitation, his expression calm, as though the outcome was already clear to him. The commander mistook this confidence for ignorance. The rules were simple: Earth soldiers against the aliens, but this time in a live combat simulation. No more practice rounds. The commander assured his officers that the humans wouldn't stand a chance once the real stakes were on the line. His forces had been prepared for everything, after all. Or so he believed. As the combat began, the alien soldiers charged in with their usual force and precision, relying on their superior technology to give them an edge. They moved quickly, their weapons blazing, confident that this time, victory was assured. They had adjusted their tactics, they thought, to account for the humans' surprising agility and cunning. But the humans had adapted too. The Earth soldiers didn't just respond to the attack, they anticipated it. They moved through the battlefield with a fluidity that suggested they knew exactly what was coming. Every alien maneuver was met with a counter that seemed almost effortless. The humans weren't just reacting. They were dictating the flow of the battle, pulling the alien forces into traps they didn't even realize were there until it was too late. The teacher's training had drilled into them the importance of strategy, of understanding the enemy's mindset. These soldiers knew how to think like their opponents, how to anticipate their every move, and more importantly, how to exploit their weaknesses. The alien commander, watching from the sidelines, began to feel a sense of dread creep in. This was not a fluke. The humans were winning again, not through sheer luck, but through superior planning and execution. As the battle wore on, the alien soldiers grew more desperate. Their attacks became frantic, disorganized. They hadn't been trained to handle an opponent who fought like this. Their reliance on technology had made them complacent. They expected their equipment to do the work for them, but Earth soldiers had turned the very terrain into a weapon, using every rock, every shadow to their advantage. They moved like ghosts, striking swiftly and disappearing before the aliens could retaliate. The commander's frustration grew with every passing minute. He couldn't understand how this was happening. His forces were supposed to be unbeatable. And yet, here they were, struggling against soldiers using what he saw as outdated tactics and inferior weapons. His anger boiled over as he watched his elite troops fall, one by one, unable to keep up with the relentless assault from the Earth soldiers. But it wasn't just their combat skills that were superior. The humans displayed a level of discipline and unity that the alien forces couldn't match. They worked as a single unit, their movements perfectly synchronized, as though they shared one mind. Every action had a purpose, every decision made with the bigger picture in mind. They weren't just fighting to win, they were fighting to dominate, to leave no doubt about their superiority. The alien commander's pride wouldn't let him back down, though. He pushed his forces harder, demanding more from them, even as they continued to falter. His soldiers, once confident and cocky, were now visibly shaken. The battle had taken its toll, and they no longer moved with the same precision. Their once flawless formations were now fractured, their attacks disjointed. Meanwhile, the Earth soldiers remained calm, focused, and deadly efficient. In the end, it wasn't even close. The aliens were utterly defeated, their forces in disarray, while the Earth soldiers stood victorious, barely winded from the fight. The battlefield was littered with the remnants of the alien commander's pride, his once invincible soldiers now reduced to defeated warriors. It was a humiliating loss, and the commander knew it. He stared at the scene before him in disbelief. His entire worldview had been shattered. Everything he thought he knew about warfare, about superiority, had been proven wrong in a matter of hours. These humans, who he had once considered beneath his notice, had bested him at every turn. The teacher approached, his expression as calm as ever. He didn't gloat, didn't boast. He simply stood there, watching as the alien commander struggled to find the words. "You underestimated us," the teacher said quietly. "And that was your first mistake." The commander looked at him, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger and confusion. How did you do this?" he demanded. His voice was no longer filled with arrogance, but with genuine disbelief. He needed to understand how his forces had been so completely outmatched. The teacher didn't hesitate in his response. "We train to think, not just to fight. To understand our enemy, to adapt. It's not about who has the better weapons, or the most advanced technology. It's about who can use what they have more effectively. That's why you lost." The words stung, but the commander knew they were true. He had been too focused on his own superiority, too blinded by his reliance on technology to see the real strength of the humans standing before him. And now, he had paid the price for his arrogance. He didn't say anything else. There was nothing left to say. His soldiers were defeated, his pride shattered. The humans had proven their worth in the most decisive way possible, and there was no denying it. As the alien forces retreated, the teacher watched them go, his face unreadable. He had seen this all before, the rise and fall of those who thought themselves invincible. And he knew deep down that this wasn't the last time Earth soldiers would be tested. But for now, they had proven their strength, not just to the alien commander, but to the entire galaxy. The battle was over, but the lesson had been learned. Earth was not to be underestimated. The alien commander, his pride bruised and his forces humiliated, could not let this defeat go unanswered. In his mind, this was no longer about a simple test of strength, it had become personal. He was determined to show the galaxy that Earth was not as formidable as it appeared. The idea of being outdone by humans, beings he once considered inferior, gnawed at him. He would not return to his empire with the shame of such a defeat lingering over him. He needed to prove that his warriors were still the dominant force. This time, there would be no simulation, no safety protocols. The alien commander decided to escalate the situation beyond a controlled environment. Real combat, with all its risks and consequences, was the only way he believed he could regain his lost honor. The commander approached the teacher again, his demeanor colder than before. There was no humor in his eyes, no arrogance in his voice. He was dead serious. This time, it will be real. No holding back. The teacher, as always, remained calm. He did not flinch at the commander's threat. His response was measured, his voice even. If that's what you want. There was no fear, only quiet resolve. He knew his soldiers were ready. They had been trained not for mere exercises, but for actual war. And while the alien commander might have seen this as a last-ditch effort to save face, the teacher knew this was just another test for his soldiers. They had faced worse, and they would face it again. The alien commander gave the order. His forces, this time armed with their full arsenal, moved into position. The atmosphere was tense. The alien troops, while still formidable, now carried the weight of their previous defeat on their shoulders. They were no longer as confident, no longer as eager to engage. Doubt had crept into their minds, and it showed in their movements. Their once rigid formations were now tinged with hesitation. On the other side, Earth soldiers prepared themselves. They did so quietly, efficiently, without fanfare. There was no boasting, no outward display of aggression. They simply readied their weapons, checked their gear, and moved into formation, just as they had been trained to do. To an outsider, they might have appeared unremarkable. But beneath that calm exterior was a deadly focus, a readiness to act with the precision that had been drilled into them by the teacher. The alien forces struck first. Their advanced weaponry lit up the battlefield, sending waves of energy blasts toward the humans. The sound was deafening, the air crackling with the force of the assault. But the Earth soldiers didn't falter. They moved with practiced speed, using the terrain to their advantage, dodging and weaving through the onslaught with an almost unnatural grace. Their movements weren't just reactions, they were calculated, designed to draw the alien forces into vulnerable positions. The aliens pressed forward, trying to overwhelm the humans with sheer firepower. But no matter how much force they applied, the Earth soldiers were always one step ahead. They used their environment with a mastery that the alien forces couldn't match. While the aliens relied on brute strength and technological superiority, the humans relied on adaptability, on reading the flow of battle and adjusting accordingly. Every attack the aliens launched was met with a counter, every advance blocked by an ambush or a tactical retreat that led them deeper into traps. As the battle wore on, it became clear that the Earth soldiers weren't just holding their ground, they were gaining the upper hand. The alien troops, despite their advanced weapons, began to falter. Their cohesion broke down as frustration set in. They were not used to this kind of warfare. They were trained to overpower, to dominate, not to outthink an enemy who fought with such relentless precision. The alien commander watched in horror as his troops fell apart. This wasn't just a defeat, it was a dismantling. His forces, who he had once considered the finest warriors in the galaxy, were being systematically outmaneuvered and taken down by an enemy he had grossly underestimated. His confidence shattered, he ordered a full assault, hoping to overwhelm the humans with sheer numbers. But it was too late. The Earth soldiers, now fully in control of the battle, moved in to finish the fight. They struck with pinpoint accuracy, exploiting every weakness, every crack in the alien force's armor. They didn't rely on overwhelming force. Instead, they fought with deadly efficiency, each strike calculated to inflict maximum damage with minimum effort. It was a masterclass in warfare, a display of skill that left no doubt as to who the superior warriors were. The alien forces, now in complete disarray, retreated under the commander's desperate orders. What had started as an attempt to reclaim honor had turned into a crushing defeat. The commander, watching his forces flee, felt the weight of his failure settle over him like a heavy cloak. There was no recovering from this. His pride, his reputation, had been destroyed, not by a larger force, but by a group of soldiers who fought with discipline, intelligence, and an understanding of warfare that far surpassed his own. The teacher, standing at the edge of the battlefield, observed the retreating aliens with the same calm expression he had worn throughout. He knew this was the end of it. The commander had pushed his forces to their limit, and they had broken. There would be no more challenges, no more tests. The lesson had been taught, and the alien commander had learned it the hard way. As the dust settled, the teacher turned to his soldiers, who stood silently, their faces unreadable but their postures speaking volumes. They had done their job, and they had done it well. There was no need for celebration, no need for words. They knew what they were capable of, and now, so did their enemies. The alien commander, once so proud and sure of his superiority, left the battlefield in silence. He couldn't even bring himself to look at the teacher as he passed. There was nothing left to say. The humans had proven themselves in a way that no amount of technology or firepower could counter. They had shown that true strength didn't come from weapons, but from the warriors who wielded them. For the teacher, this was just another day. He had trained his soldiers for this exact moment, for the day when they would be underestimated, overlooked, and dismissed. And now, as the alien forces retreated, he knew that the galaxy would never make that mistake again. Earth's soldiers had proven themselves not just as warriors, but as the deadliest force the galaxy had ever seen. And they had done it under the guidance of a teacher who understood that the greatest victories were won not with brute force, but with strategy, discipline, and a deep understanding of the enemy. The battle was over, and Earth stood victorious. The aftermath of the battle left the alien commander in a state of disbelief. He had not just lost, he had been completely outclassed. His soldiers, his elite forces, were no match for the Earth soldiers who had fought with a precision and ferocity that defied his understanding. He had never imagined that humans, with their primitive technology, could defeat an army like his. But now, standing amidst the wreckage of his once proud forces, he had no choice but to confront the reality of his failure. The teacher, however, showed no signs of victory or pride. He remained as calm and composed as he had been throughout the entire ordeal. To him, this was not about winning or losing, it was about proving a point. His soldiers were prepared for anything, not because of their equipment or numbers, but because of their discipline, their training, and their understanding of war. They were the embodiment of everything he had taught them, and now they had shown the galaxy what they were capable of. The alien commander, still grappling with the enormity of his defeat, approached the teacher one last time. His once arrogant demeanor had been replaced by a quiet resignation. There was no anger in his voice, no bravado. Only the weight of a lesson learned too late. "I underestimated you," the commander admitted, his voice low, almost ashamed. "I thought we were superior in every way. But I was wrong." The teacher looked at him, his expression unchanged. "You relied on your technology, on your numbers," he said, his tone even. "But you forgot that battles aren't won by machines. They're won by the people who fight them." The commander nodded slowly, his gaze distant. He had spent his entire career believing that technological superiority was all that mattered. His empire had always prided itself on its advancements, its ability to overwhelm enemies with sheer force. But here on Earth, he had faced something different, something he had not prepared for. These soldiers, trained by the teacher, fought with a level of skill and understanding that went far beyond what any machine could provide. For a long moment neither spoke. The battlefield around them was quiet now, the tension from the battle having faded into a heavy stillness. The alien commander was no longer the confident, boastful figure he had been when he first arrived. His defeat had humbled him in a way that no words ever could. "You trained them well," the commander finally said, breaking the silence. There was a note of respect in his voice now, something that had been missing before. He had seen firsthand what the teacher's methods could produce, and he could no longer deny their effectiveness. The teacher gave a small nod. "They trained themselves. I only showed them the way." The commander frowned, unsure of what to make of the teacher's modesty. But he didn't question it. He had learned enough to know that this man's strength didn't come from seeking praise or recognition. It came from a deep understanding of warfare, of the mind and spirit, and from teaching his soldiers to fight with more than just their weapons. The commander looked back at the remnants of his forces, his shoulders slumped with the weight of his defeat. He knew that his reputation would be in ruins after this. His empire would demand answers, and he would have to face the consequences of his failure. But more than that, he would carry with him the knowledge that he had been bested by a force he had once considered insignificant. "I'll leave," the commander said at last. "There's nothing more to be done here. You've won." The teacher didn't respond. He didn't need to. The battle had spoken for itself. The alien commander turned away, signaling to his remaining soldiers to retreat. As they began their withdrawal, the teacher watched them go, his expression still unreadable. His soldiers stood nearby, their faces calm and steady. They had fought hard, but there was no celebration, no cheering. They had done what they were trained to do, and that was enough. Victory, to them, wasn't about glory, it was about survival, about proving themselves capable in the face of overwhelming odds. As the alien ships lifted off, disappearing into the sky, the teacher turned to his soldiers. "Well done," he said simply. His words were brief, but they carried the weight of deep respect. These men and women had trained under him for years, honing their skills, learning the art of war. And now they had shown the galaxy that Earth was not a planet to be taken lightly. The soldiers nodded, accepting his praise with quiet humility. They knew that this victory was as much theirs as it was their teacher's. Every lesson he had taught them, every drill they had endured, had prepared them for this moment. They had stood against a force that should have crushed them, and they had emerged victorious not because of their weapons, but because of their discipline, their unity, and their unwavering determination. The teacher turned back to the horizon, watching as the last of the alien ships vanished from sight. He knew that this wouldn't be the last time Earth would face a threat like this. The galaxy was vast, and there were many who still underestimated humanity. But after today, the message would spread. Earth was not to be ignored or dismissed. Its soldiers were among the deadliest in the galaxy, trained by a teacher who understood that war was as much about the mind as it was about the body. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the training grounds, the teacher stood in silence, his thoughts already on the next challenge. He knew that the aliens would return one day. Maybe not this commander, maybe not even this empire. But someone, somewhere, would come again, seeking to test Earth's strength. And when they did, they would find that the soldiers trained under his watch were ready, just as they had been today. Victory wasn't the end. It was just another step in the journey. The galaxy had learned a lesson today, but the teacher knew that there would always be more to learn, more to prepare for. And as long as he was there to guide them, Earth's soldiers would continue to stand ready, their skills honed, their minds sharp. The battle was over, but the war was far from finished. The teacher, and the soldiers he had trained, would be waiting. Always prepared, always ready for whatever came next.